Hey everybody, I'm Lady Sylvine and welcome to my realm of purpose. Today we are going to be starting what is essentially this Elven God series I have planned. And basically what all that's going to be is just a bunch of lore about each of the Elven gods as individuals. These videos will all follow the same format, or I'll try to, and I'll have that listed in a sec. So, let's just get right in there. It's going to be a long one, guys. 1. Introduction. So, the first god I will be covering in this series is Dune, the god of craft and building. Dune is identified as a male deity within the 8, possibly 9, possibly 11 god pantheon belonging to the elves. And he's associated with craft work, so making armour, weapons, tools, clothes, equipment, etc. He's known by several names and titles. The Master of Crafts, Clever Dune, God of Craft, and God of Crafts in Building. There's also the matter of the pronunciation of Dune that's 100% worth mentioning right out of the gate. A few people, including myself, pronounce his name as Dune. But according to the World of Fadus Volume 1, it's pronounced Ghilan'nain. It'll be on screen so you can see how they say it's pronounced, but that's not really great phonetically because nay makes sense, but ja. So is it Johnny or June? I still have no idea. Is it Arlathan or Arlathan? We don't know! Before we go into the rest of it, I want to just establish that the purpose of pantheons and their gods is to give overarching credit to things that seem beyond moral ability or comprehension, or to ask favour from some grand power in performing some task that, you don't feel able to do in your own right. Like a blacksmith, or a builder, or a seamstress, or a traveller. The seamstress, builder, blacksmith more so going into Dune's direction, specifically. The curious part is how diversified Dune seems to be. He's associated with a seamstress, tailor, an architect, builder, and a blacksmith. A bunch of other things, just some very oddly different job titles. Usually when you have a polytheistic religion, they have specific gods for specific things. Hence, why there are so many of them. But the Elven Pantheon here has so few figureheads, and each individual is credited with multiple aspects of what would be Elven life. It's not just Dune. The other gods get a bit wibbly-wobbly in their domains when you dig around enough. Wait until we get to Vallaslin. Oh boy. He's my favourite, by the way. You'll see that in another video. Dune usually gets singled out as a bit of an outlier because there's something indescribably off about him compared to the others. He's vague, and not much gets said about him and how he relates to the other members of the Pantheon. More on that in a bit. What's ultimately interesting about Dune is how little information the canon lore actually, gives about him, to the point where even in lore people seem to get confused about what his original purpose was compared to what he is now to the elves, given how much change has happened in elven culture over, thousands of years. Dalish legend says Dune is a god of crafts and building, but the oldest depictions have none of the tools the Dalish associate with him. Dune's role may have changed over time, or simply cannot be understood today. Firstly, I would love to know what the oldest depictions actually are, because unfortunately the best thing we have is a mosaic from the Temple of Mythal. But those mosaics turn up in other, more modern built locations, things that would have happened after the Dales, basically, which is not ancient elves, so I don't know if that's a copy-paste situation that's happening, or I really don't know. But we'll go into that in the items and places section. What's interesting is this person in the codex says none of the tools the Dalish associate him with. None. So why is he given credit to those tools that are shown in future, if none of them were in the past? What was his original purpose? What did he do? What did he represent? Why did his role change? Was there something the ancient elves had that the modern elves do not? Yes, there is actually a lot of things. These are just, a few of the questions we tend to ponder with June. He is a bit of an enigma. Anyway, that's all in this section. On to chapter 2. 2. Their place in the Pantheon. So this section I'll go over basically 2 things. The origin story and relationships. So we'll start with the origin story first. In terms of an origin, most of the other gods tend to have one. Mythal came from the sea, Vallaslin and Dirthamin were the children of Mythal and Elgornan, presumably the natural way you have children. Ghilan'nain was granted godhood by the other gods, etc., etc. June doesn't really have any credible lore regarding where he came from, and the ones we have are dubious and rather contradictive. In the Dragon Age Tabletop Player's Guide, it states that June created himself, somehow. But 2 things I need to say about this. 1, I don't yet own a copy of the Player's Guide, so this information comes from the wiki, so I don't know exactly what the context is. And 2, I've heard that some of the information from the tabletop is dubious to the game's canonical lore, like it's its own separate thing, so I don't know what to believe in this, or what the context of it was, like I said. Let me know in the comments if you've read the Player's Guide. I would love to know where exactly it says that June created himself and what was the context surrounding that sentence. Thank you in advance. But also in the World of Phaedus Volume 1, it states, Andruil's godly sister Selaise, the Hearthkeeper, stayed home to sing and make art while wild Andruil frolicked. Their brother, the god of craft June, used Selaise's lessons... ... So this could mean he was the literal brother of Andruil and Selaise? Whether or not they came from Mythal or Elgornan, which kind of gets implied, it'll be on screen where it says who were their parents, so we can kind of try and work something out, but he could have been the literal brother of Andruil and Selaise, in that sense. But perhaps it's more of a brother in godhood, like, a brother or sister in godhood in comparison to mortal, more perceivably mortal elves, is what I meant. Like how the Dalish recognise one another as kin, regardless of what clan they belong to. I should also mention that the wiki cites June as being Selaise's husband, and I assume that information comes from the tabletop guidebook. So either he was her brother, or husband, or both, or neither, but several sources imply that June's closest, and actually only relationship with any of the other gods that's ever mentioned is with Selaise. So there has to be some kind of connection there, I believe. And as I said, there's no other connection he seems to have. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be overlooking something, but as far as my research has turned out, there's nothing. It's just Selaise he's connected to. Maybe Andruil, since that one line says it's her brother too, but there's nothing else that says anything as far as I can tell. And wow, that was actually a really short section, so yep, we'll just move on to chapter 3. 3. Iconography and Symbols. So each of the gods is associated with an animal, sometimes more than one, actually. June, along with Selaise, and to a degree Elgornan, are the only ones that just don't have a sacred animal attached to them in legends. Like, for example, Dirthamin is associated with bears and ravens, Mythal, dragons. These guys just don't for some reason, and that could be important or informative in some way. Don't know how, but that's kind of how that goes. They just don't. There is a mosaic we see in the Temple of Mythal, as well as in the Ghilan'nain, depicting him standing with something in his hands before him, and a table or bench below that, Or it could possibly be an anvil in front of him. Don't know. It could hint at his role as a craftsman of some sort. To me, it appears like a soldier waiting for orders, or perhaps it's a helmet in his hands. Or maybe it's him shaping wet clay, actually, in an intimidating fashion. Just aggressively making pottery. I don't know. There's also a mask depicted in Dragon Age Origins and the Dalish camp. I believe it's for the Dalish Warden's camp in the origin stories. I don't really have much to say on this, other than several other gods are shown to have masks. Not all of them, but a couple of them. So, who knows? They exist. There we go. There's going to be a lot of that in the series. I don't have much to say on it other than we can speculate that there are other cultures that put on masks for ceremonial purposes or in reverence to their gods, etc. I can't speak much to that, but I do believe that is a thing in certain cultures. Let me know down in the comments if you know which cultures perform that and what the purpose is. That could be insightful. I think that's super interesting. And that's all we have on iconography and symbols. Yeah, I know that's not much, but that's pretty much what we have and what we have to work with. There's just a lot of mystery surrounding June because there's not much depicting him compared to some of the others like Mythal. That's all for this section, on to the next one. 4. Vallaslin. Vallaslin are what the tattoos the Dalish elves have on their faces, and sometimes over their entire body. It depends on elf to elf. But so far, in the series of characters we've seen, it's only been on their faces, and it will always be on their face. It is essentially a visible show of, I am different from everyone else because I have this on my face. I am connecting with my ancestors, I'm connecting with my gods, I reject everything else, and you can see that I reject everything else. That is essentially what the Vallaslin are. Along with, paying reverence to whatever god they dedicate their Vallaslin to. So, June's Vallaslin. There are 4 variations of his Vallaslin in the series that we see, as far as I've been able to find. In Origins and Dragon Age 2, there is the simple and complex versions, on screen here, and in Inquisition, there is also a simple and complex version, and they look like this, which will also show on screen. What this Vallaslin seems to depict is weaving branches, perhaps reeds, or even thread, which is a motif that comes up often with elves, naturalism, grace, all that kind of stuff. But the weaving just seems, it seems on point for June, given what he's attributed to, the creation or making of something from something else. It feels pretty on point to me. Here's some examples of elves in the series we know who bear June's Vallaslin. In Origins and Dragon Age 2, there is Fenrirel, not to be confused with Fenrirel. He is a hunter from the Dalish Warden's Clan Sabre. If you don't remember, he's the one who helps you go look for Tamlin, along with Merrill in that origin story. Junar, another hunter from the Dalish Warden's clan. You see him helping the city elf Paul learn archery. Varathorn, the craftsmaster for Zafrian's clan. Linnea, Zafrian's first, or if you prefer, apprentice, and possible keeper depending on how you do that quest, let's say. Dagon, who is a hunter from Zafrian's clan. And Ariane from the Witch Hunt DLC. I loved her so much, she was so wholesome. In an Inquisition in the Exalted Plains, there do exist some nameless members of Howin's clan with June's Vallaslin. And in the multiplayer, there's Cillian, an arcane warrior formerly of Clan Ralaferin. I believe you can find him around Skyhold, but honestly I can't recall since I know at least some of the multiplayer characters can be seen around Skyhold, so I assume he's there. But yeah, if you play multiplayer, you can play as him. I believe you need to progress a little in the multiplayer to be able to play him, to unlock him, but he is there, and that's pretty interesting. That is all I have for this section. Moving on to the next. 5. Items, shrines, and places of significance. Let's start with something simple. There exists a wooden puzzle box called June's Knot. This is referenced to in World of Fadus Volume 2 in a quote from Cillian, as I mentioned before who he is, about a young Neria. These are both playable characters in Inquisition's multiplayer, and they are both in some fashion members of the Ralafaran clan. They are both Dalish elves, which you may recognise because a good few codex entries are from former keeper Gisharel, one of them. The quote says, Neria was sitting by Keeper Elindra, her attention focused entirely on a wooden puzzle that we call June's Knot. Anethera, I said. She didn't reply. I don't think she even knew I was there. That was Neria. It still is Neria. Tightly focused, determined. Once she puts her mind to something, it must be done. It will be done. Not even the creators themselves could shake her conviction. I wonder how long she spent on that little wooden carving. Did Elindra ever reveal that there is no solution to June's Knot? Perhaps Neria didn't accept it. For all I know, she's still working on it. So this tells us that June's Knot is a wooden box with carvings, and it's a puzzle that has no solution. We could take this at face value to mean June's legacy and teachings are about knowing when to give up when you're beat or facing impossible odds, or perhaps it's a lesson of patience or futility or humility of some kind. Or maybe it's that one toy you gift a child to keep them distracted while the adults are all busy, or, you need a break from them from time to time. Who knows? It could also imply something along the lines of how June is impossible to solve as a being, basically. Because he is pretty complicated, as you'll see in the rest of this video. Or perhaps a lesson about how you shouldn't get close to the gods, because they're untouchable, unknowable. You're delving into a realm you have no knowledge or experience of. You're just a mortal being. Therefore, there is no solution. You, as a mortal being, cannot solve this. Maybe. Maybe I'm digging too far into that, but it could be that. Who knows? It does actually remind me of this puzzle box from this Netflix series called The Dragon Prince. It looked like a useless children's toy that showed you different symbols, blah blah blah, and it didn't really mean much until later on in the series it gets revealed that the box resonates with different forms of magic. So the different carvings and symbols on it, when you're in the presence of a certain form of magic, like illusion magic, it'll light up that part of the box kind of thing. It comes across as the magic version of those boxes for young children you get, where they put certain shapes with corresponding holes. So maybe it's something like that. I doubt it, but why not put that in there anyway, because it could also be that. Who knows? Next is the legendary sword Evanura, which you find in the Emerald Graves and equipped to a sword and shield warrior. The description on this item reads as follows. Forged by the High Keeper of June, god of the craft, after the Elven homeland's creation in the Dales. This sword passed from the first Emerald Knight, Vallaslin, to his squire Sulan, after the boy saved him in battle. The last Emerald Knight to wield it was Lindarini, who fell in the Second Exalted March's final battle. This tells us more broadly that High Keepers are a thing that exists, whatever the hell that means. I would guess they act like high priests, or maybe even high kings, or, some kind of top official regarding certain gods, since it is a High Keeper of June. I would assume that there are High Keepers of the other gods too. And since this takes place during the time of the Dales, before the establishment of the nomadic Dalish clans, a keeper would be something a little bit different. A keeper to the Dalish as a clan leader, kind of. A keeper is like a final authority within a clan. They kind of play the role as shaman, chief, leader, etc. they combine all of those things, but that is for nomadic clans who are wandering, collecting information, trying to maintain their way of life. A highkeeper during the time of the Dales would have been something kind of different, I imagine, because they're not moving around, they are staying in one place. Maybe they did move around, maybe they were like nomadic priests going around the kingdom, who knows? That's an interesting thought to propose. So, yeah, there is something called a High Keeper, and there was a High Keeper of Dune. And he is actually the only god who has a High Keeper that's ever mentioned in lore. I presume there are others, but we don't know. Also, this High Keeper was specifically a smith. This sword was forged by a High Keeper of Dune. It's a sword that has lasted through the ages. I imagine they were very skilled, so I imagine the Dearth of Aran, which is what the Dalish call the Dales, stopped being a kingdom about 700 years ago. So that kind of culture is gone, but if something like this, a sword of all things, could last that long, I imagine it was a very well built sword, especially since you find it in a grave. Maybe there's magic. Maybe there's magic involved. Do you know that? Maybe a High Keeper of Dune is like a magic forge master of some type. That was cool. I like that idea. You know what? I'm gonna go with that. That's gonna be my personal headcanon. It is curious because, as I said, like, the current understand to be keepers of Dalish clans is more of like a lore keeper, leader, vaguely priestly figure. It really depends how you look at it. Perhaps back then they had their temples, they had their fixed places of worship, where they could freely just worship their gods, explore their culture as far as they can, given that they lost it to Vinter. Going back to the smith part of this, perhaps their form of worship was more so aligned to the god they were the High Keeper of. For example, a High Keeper of Andrul would be this master hunter, perhaps? Or a High Keeper of Mythal might be something like a judge or a lawyer, however you would understand that in medieval fantasy. Who knows, maybe Dune was the only god with a High Keeper. We don't really know. I doubt it, but maybe. As for shrines and places of significance, Dune doesn't seem to have any shrines in any of the games, books, comics, or other extended media. Though Soleil's his sister wife does, and it kind of relates to him actually. In the Exalted Plains and Inquisition, during the quest Something to Prove, and corresponding quest lines, you know, the one with Vallaslin, his sister, and the Dalish, you know, he consorted with demons and he paid the consequence, that quest. You enter some ruins and you find a shrine to Soleil's, and before the altar is a corpse that you can loot Ghilan'nain's talisman. The talisman isn't important, necessarily. It's just an item you give Keeper Hallen. But the fact that it belonged to the Emerald Knight Ghilan'nain, who wielded Evanura, a sword forged by the High Keeper of Dune, and her talisman was found in front of a shrine of Soleil's, that just feels relevant to me, because of the connection between Dune and Soleil's that already exists. And I don't know, I just thought that was worth mentioning. I thought that was kind of cool. And as I mentioned before, there's a mosaic depicting Dune in 2 places in Inquisition, in the Temple of Mythal, along with mosaics of all the elven gods, and strangely enough, in the Ghilan'nain, of all places, in the Emerald Graves, there are depictions of Dune there, as well, of this mosaic. The Ghilan'nain, for reference, was the final resting place of the Emerald Knights. The ruins of their tomb, basically. What's interesting is that there are 3 of the elven gods that get represented in the Ghilan'nain. Vallaslin, the Guide of the Dead, that just makes sense to me. Mythal, the Great Protector. Again, I can understand why she would be symbolised. She is probably one of the most important of the gods, it makes sense. And then there's Dune, the god of craft and building, I guess. Why is he there? One of these things is not like the others. I can understand the other 2, but really? Dune? No others? Just those 3. I do understand that this could just be one of those copy-paste situations from the developers, Or perhaps the people placing objects and images in the area forgot this was June and intended maybe Dirthamin or, I don't know, someone else that might have been more relevant. But that feels insulting to say so, because I do like to believe that things are placed in areas with purpose. I want to believe that. I'm willing to believe also that it was just, oh, that's an elf image. Put that there. There we go. Again, that just feels wrong in some way, so I don't know. Perhaps, actually, that since June was attributed to building, and the weapons and armour the knights would have used, it was more so an acknowledgement to his domain and the significance of it to the knights in their life. You know, the equipment they would have wielded, and in death, the grand state of the final resting place itself is maybe a nod to him and look, they did these great things in life with the equipment that we were able to make through your teachings and glory, yay. And because of your teachings and your wisdom, generous, allowing us to be able to make such grand places, we were able to make something so lovely to memorialize these wonderful warriors who gave their lives for the Dales. Maybe something like that? I don't know. I might be digging too deep into it, but I want to give it meaning. I want it to mean something. I don't want it to be nonsense. All that. I don't really know. I just found it weird that June's mosaic was in there, given how little he's ever brought up or depicted in the series. It just felt out of place. Anyway, that is all I have for this section. On to the next chapter. 6. The Dalish Beliefs. We dedicate all our crafts to June, for it is he who taught the people to bend the branches of trees and make our bows, and to fashion coverings of furs and ironbark. Without June, would we have the Aravel, or the harnesses for our Hala? When the people were young, we wandered the forests without purpose. We drank from streams and ate the berries and nuts that we could find. We did not hunt, for we had no bows. We wore nothing, for we had no knowledge of spinning and needlecraft. We shivered in the cold nights, and went hungry through the winters, when all the world was covered in ice and snow. Then Salaise the hearthkeeper came, and gave us fire, and taught us how to feed it with wood. June taught us to fashion bows and arrows and knives, so that we could hunt. We learned to cook the flesh of the creatures we hunted over Salaise's fire, and we learned to clothe ourselves in their furs and skins, and the people were no longer cold and hungry. So, the Dalish believed June to be a god who taught the elves how to manipulate physical things with purpose, while some of the gods represent ideas like justice, vengeance, trickery, knowledge, etc. June, as well as Salaise, seem to have offered a means of the people acting for themselves, to not rely on the luck of finding berries or a dry cave to sleep in, and the like. He gave them the knowledge of how to make weapons, armour, clothes, how to build their landships, how to make spits, pots, pans for cooking, make even water fillers, I imagine. Things like that. June to the Dalish is this essential god. In this codex, they describe themselves as wandering without purpose, like wild beasts relying on luck and the occasional intervention from the gods. Out of all of the gods, I really love how it seems the only gods in the Dalish legends that seem to directly act for the people, allowing them to learn and grow independently as people, are June and Salaise. And I suppose they get so overlooked in lore because they stepped away after giving the people knowledge. They let them have the thing and then kept giving, but let them grow independently with that knowledge. June and Salaise gave the elves the ability to create, to feed, clothe and shelter themselves from the elements on their own, so that they can fulfill those most basic needs, so that they are able to explore those other aspects of life after obtaining security of reliability and sustainability of their physiological needs. And we can assume that they continuously kept giving them new knowledge as they developed and grew as a society, as a civilization, let's say. As it states that June taught them how to make harnesses for their Hala, And we know that the goddess Ghilan'nain was the first Hala, according to the Dalish. And she was once a mortal huntress who worshipped Andruil. Long story short, she got elevated to godhood as the mother of the Hala, this goddess of navigation. But she was just a mortal person once. She was just one of these mortal elves who already worshipped the gods. And it wasn't till after her ascension that the Hala became a thing. Basically, what this implies is that after the elves could hunt with bows and traps with this knowledge, and after the ascension of another god, and then after all that, June then gave them the knowledge of how to make harnesses for their Hala. Because he then, after the Hala grew so numerous and important to the elves, June taught them how to make harnesses to better utilise them in their daily life. I just feel like that's really... I don't know, I just like that it wasn't just, bam, there you go, you can feed and clothe yourselves, you can shelter yourselves from the storm, there you go. But no, he kept on giving them new knowledge, and they attribute him to that. He feels like an active participant in their lives, more so than an idea. And on that note, it seems like June's role, not just as a teacher of essential practical knowledge, he seems to repeatedly bestow that knowledge on the elves relating to the other gods. Without him, they wouldn't know how to build shrines or altars or temples to their gods. While Andruil was the huntress, without June teaching them how to make bows and knives and arrows and such, how could the elves ever hunt and prepare their kills that Andruil's this goddess of? While Ghilan'nain is the mother of the Hala and goddess of navigation, without June the people would have wandered on foot without any knowledge of how to make arvels, saddles, halters, harnesses for their Hala, and I guess other beasts of burden. And Soleil's taught the elves how to kindle fire and feed it wood to keep it burning, and how to heal with herbs and whatnot. But June was the one who taught them how to forge weapons, to cook meat, to make and use pots and kettles and such, to brew teas and make healing elixirs and whatnot. It all comes down to June giving people that extra helping hand, where without his intervention, they would genuinely, the entire Pantheon breaks down without June when you actually look at it. They're kind of all useless. They weren't the ones to give the people this knowledge. It was him. So yeah, June's pretty awesome, actually, according to the Dalish. And given how much we take such things for granted, like the ability to just, oh, I'm just gonna go pop the kettle on, I'm just making some pasta in this pot, those sort of, like, obviously medieval Dalish fantasy kind of stuff, equivalents, but those kind of things I think get taken for granted, which is kind of why June's lore doesn't get brought up so much, because it's just stuff you would take for granted having for that long. It just feels natural that his domain gets overlooked so much, because unless you're becoming some kind of artisan, yeah, of course you wouldn't really pay much attention to June, because everything you have already, you take it for granted. And yeah, I guess that's why he gets overlooked so much in lore. However respected he is. I really like June after doing all this research. I really like him. Anyway, that is the end of this section. Next chapter. 7. Ancient Elven Insight. In this section I'd typically be going over how actually terrible the god was according to, you know, what they were to the ancient elves. Basically, what the perspective of the people who would have lived when the gods were living amongst the people, what that perspective would have been. Because the elven gods were real people who existed and were indeed banished by Fen'Harel somewhere. Basically because they were really awful people and were going to destroy the world. Well, according to Solus at least. However much you trust his word on that. They weren't even really gods, just insanely powerful and influential mage leaders that, consequential to ancient elven immortality, became remembered as gods. They were just in power for that long. They were called the Evanuris. So anyway, June. Well, I'd like to give you some concrete facts, but the truth is there is even less lore about the original June than there is in Dalish interpretation, and I'm incredibly sorry for that. There's just so little, really. Solus, he does describe Mythal as the best of them in the Trespasser DLC, them being the Evanuris. And while I think he's speaking completely from a bias towards Mythal, this does imply that June was also on par with the immoral acts that the other Evanuris committed. For example, blood sports, slavery, murder, experimentation on people. But he never says anything more specific, and June is never really singled out at all. But we can presume he was either complicit or active in the terrible things that happened, so... As mentioned before with the Codex entry, The Mystery of June, he seems to not be associated with the Dalish interpretations of what his supposed domain was. As the Codex states, the oldest depictions have none of the tools the Dalish associate him with. June's role may have changed over time, or simply cannot be understood today. The Mystery of June, indeed. So, the only thing I can imagine his original role relating to is a difference in Elven culture now versus in the time of Elvenan. And as we know, the difference was the creation of the Veil, where magic and dreams and spirits and all that were locked behind a barrier between realities. It could literally be anything, but I would still assume his role was something to do with the role of a craftsman of some kind. To manipulate one thing into a different state of being to become useful in some fashion, to be usable. Since in the Temple of Mythal we find the Codex entry, Song to Solaise, presumably coming from the ancient elves themselves, a line reads, Solaise, whose skill rivals June's craft. So we can assume that he had some kind of craft. Maybe he was a great architect who used magic. Maybe he was a smith who forged weapons for the other Evanuris and their armies. Maybe he created the Vallaslin, or utilised lyrium in some way for, enchanting or something. It could literally be anything. I do want to say about that quote, though, is that this was a song to Solaise, likely from her followers. It says that her skill rivals June's craft, not necessarily that it was better than it. Implying it's closely matched, but neither is better than the other, definitively. But the word choice of skill and craft is also pretty interesting. The difference between skill and craft is subtle, but I think it's worth mentioning. A skill is something you train to do well. It's practiced knowledge. Skill is also more vague, in my opinion. You can be skilled in anything. Public speaking, cooking, magic. It's about doing something and doing it well, that you can call it a skill. You're skilled in this thing. Craft, however, is about manipulating something into something else. It's about creation, building, shaping, constructing. It's about taking something raw or already established and fashioning it into something more useful or aesthetically pleasing. What skill in craft the Codex refers to is completely unknown, sadly. But it does have some implications that are worth pondering. There does exist a Codex entry that contains ancient Elven insight into June, as well as Solaise, but we're focusing on June, which we find in the Vir Defara in the Trespasser DLC for Inquisition. The pages of this book, Memory, describe a heated argument between a group of well-dressed elves inside an elaborately arched pavilion on an island floating in the void. In the distance, haloed by a blizzard of light, thousands of elves are maintaining an elaborate magical ritual that pulls raw essence from the Fade, funneled into a sphere in the air. Through the lens of the sphere can be seen a world of indigo waterfalls and rust-red jungles, and a temple palace so frescoed and cleverly carved it is a masterpiece in itself. The well-dressed elves shouting grows so loud it can be heard over the magic. One leaps at another, howling and pulling out a knife burning with prismatic flame. Architects of the Grand Senalium, a gift from blessed Solaise to clever June, as thanks for a great favour, in friendly debate over the colour of the palace's roof trim. So, there's a lot to unpack with this codex. This comes from the time of Arlathan and Elvenan, when the gods/Evanuris walked among the people and were very real. Very, very real. Basically, the most common interpretation of this codex is that the Grand Sonalium was the gift Soleil's bestowed to June. Though for some reason, the first time I read this, I thought it was the memory itself of these architects fighting over the colour of the roof trim. The memory of this thing was the gift, and I don't know why I thought that. It makes more sense that it's the Grand Sonalium itself. But I guess maybe my brain went, oh, maybe it's some kind of jab at June and his role as Master of Craft. Haha, look at you. People like you fight over something so trivial. So maybe my brain went there? But I do like the idea that the Sonalium itself is the gift. It makes more sense to me. So let's start this breakdown with the Grand Sonalium itself. What the hell is a Sonalium? It is not a real thing. As far as I could find, a Sonalium is not a thing. It is exclusive to the elves in this fictional universe. So, unfortunately, there is no other reference to it, so it's... I don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe the writer for this does, but we fans just don't really get that answer. My guess, though, is that it's a combination of the word solarium, meaning a sunroom, a mausoleum, an above-ground tomb, and a maybe coliseum, which is basically a stadium for blood sport. So it's some kind of entertainment relaxation palace? That is my best guess. If you have a better idea about it or it's something different, I'd love to hear it. But I do actually have this fun little theory that I want to share with you guys surrounding this, and it's... just open your minds for a minute. I think this depicts June formally being given godhood via a gift befitting such a rank, a palace or temple, where he can enter... I don't like saying Euthenera because it makes me really sad, actually. So I'm gonna say Euthenera. To provide for him a place where he can enter Euthenera in luxury, if he ever needs it. So I'm probably gonna have to back this up, and I have, goodness gracious, a lot of notes on this, actually. So let's just establish some things so what I just said makes sense. 1. We know that the common elves of Elvenan, meaning non-gods Evanuris, can rise to godhood status via one of the other gods giving them that status, because they were favoured or chosen. The best example of this is Ghilan'nain, who was granted her title by being Andruil's beloved. So that can happen. I'm not pulling that out of nothing. 2. Soleil and June have this odd little separate thing going on from everyone else, at least with what they were originally to the ancient elves. So they don't ever get mentioned messing around with the others or within their stories, really. At least the original stories that we hear from the ancient elves. Especially June. I should mention that in Song to Soleil gets compared to the other gods. Not all of them, but a good few of them. But for June, there's no actual stories or connections to the other gods. He feels like a very new god who just hasn't had the time to connect with the others yet, in my opinion. He just seems completely cut off from the others, with the exception of Soleil's. So I think there's a thing between them going on, but nothing with the others. 3. With that in mind, the implication of Soleil's gifting him something as thanks for a great favour. What the favour was, we don't know, but given the titles, Blessed Soleil's, Clever June, I assume it implies rank. For people you perceive as deities, Blessed sounds a lot higher ranking than Clever. Also, gifting someone something as a favour feels very like someone higher rewarding someone lesser. You've done a favour for the kingdom, so the queen grants you a knighthood. It feels like that. Also, in what way is June clever in this situation? Is that directly related to the favour? What did he do that makes him Clever June and not Fortunate June, or Crafty June, or Sacred June? Why specifically clever? It's such a specific word, and I don't have an answer for that, but I'm curious. 4. I'll quickly explain Euthenera, because that's a point I need to hammer down on if any of this makes sense. Euthenera for the ancient elves was a deep and long sleep elves could take if A, they got old enough and too tired of living a physical life that they didn't wish to straight up die, and B, to recover from something without having to suffer through the long process of pain and inability to act for a while. The thing is, only the high-ranking and or wealthy could afford to perform this process, because you need a safe place to rest, you need people to take care of your body and make sure it doesn't die whilst you're sleeping, as well as clean, stand guard, people to serve those people, rotational services, because it'd be moronic to have a single person perform a single task, because what if they get sick? What if they die? What if they're indisposed in some way? That duty is gone, and everything falls apart. You need rotations of staff. And that is a very expensive process. You would probably have to pay a lot to get this service, between housing skilled as well as unskilled staff, as well as probably the fact that if you can afford all this, you're probably sleeping surrounded by luxury, gold, jewels, finest silks and all the land, that kind of thing. It would be very expensive. Why wouldn't you surround yourself in all of that glorification? But the point is, this was reserved for the rich and powerful, the high-ranking in society, and I believe this is what Soleil's was gifting June. She was granting him rank via a palace where he could enter Euthenera. And if he was already a god, why would he need another one of these? 5. It's not just any Synalium, it's a Grand Synalium. The Grand Synalium. This was something of great importance. I would have assumed that June already had one of these palaces. And 6. Why would we see this written down in its own codex if it wasn't supposed to be important or insightful in some way? It doesn't really give much into the relationship, but it describes the act of this giving. The Grand Synalium itself isn't that important in this, it's the fact that Soleil's is gifting something to June. It's the fact that these two barely talked about gods are interacting on an official basis. And it's in the Vir de Fara of all places. There's gotta be something behind that isn't just, oh well that's just blah 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 blah, you know? I feel like it's gotta be of some grand importance. The Grand Synalium, Blessed Soleil's, Clever June, what does it mean? This is all just speculation, but I love a good bit of theory, even if it's wrong, you know? As for the memory itself that it depicts, two architects and a heated argument that turns to violence because of the colour of the roof trims. It's definitely a word picture that's hard to put together in your mind, but I suppose that's just how the world pre-Veil was. As for the argument, I just adore that it's two architects fighting, because I do think this was a jab at June in some way. Because he's heavily associated with building, craft, all that like. He had to be in some level, I think. And as for them attacking one another over the colour of the roof trim of all things, I imagine living for so long, gaining so much skill and knowledge to be an architect for gods. I'd take a lot of pride in my work if I was in their position, and I'd be really pissed if someone said, "Nah, that's rubbish, mate. No, we're doing this instead." I do get why it turned violent, especially if you think the god might be displeased with the work after, and you think it could be better. Especially if it's a gift between gods. Like, wow, yeah, of course it turned heated and violent. I'd bet their reputations, if not their lives, were on the line in this situation. Like, imagine if they were displeased with the final product, to be like, oh shit, I'm never gonna work again. Oh god, are they gonna kill me? That's the kind of situation it is, and I think it gives a lot of insight into that culture, in a way. It's subtle, and it requires a lot of digging, but it's there, and I just love it. And yeah, that's unfortunately pretty much all I could find for the Ancient Elven Insight portion of this. Regarding June, at least. I swear the other gods do have a lot more going on. Goodness gracious, I can't wait to get to Andruil. That's gonna be horrific. But yeah, that's all I've got for this section. On to the next part. 8. Real mythology comparisons. So I feel it should be acknowledged this is a fictional deity written by real people, and there's probably going to be inspiration drawn from real-world mythologies. So this section is just some comparisons, and hopefully it will fill in some gaps, or at least give some food for thought. In Egyptian mythology we have Ptah, a creator god, the patron of craftsmen and architects. His following originates in Lower Egypt, and it's said he created the world in the design of his heart, and gave life to all the gods and their castes, through his heart and tongue. Ptah is married to the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet, who was the Eye of Ra, this vengeful manifestation of the sun god's rage. She's heavily associated with fire, burning winds, plague, healing and medicine, and alcohol. Together, Ptah and Sekhmet fathered Nefertim, who came from the primal blue waters in the form of a water lily. He represents the first light of dawn and is associated with masculine beauty and youth, and the pleasant smell of Egyptian water lilies. They're actually gorgeous. Ptah is also said to have fathered the great architect Imhotep, who's said to have designed the Step Pyramid of Djoser, which is the oldest pyramid in Egypt. Imhotep was a real person who over time became deified, and his domain was medicine. But yeah, I just think that's an interesting comparison. I do want to give a brief point in the direction of Norse mythology, and specifically Thor, the god of thunder, storm, strength, and the protector of humanity. He was famous for wielding the hammer Mjolnir, which was gifted by Loki, the trickster god, and crafted by the dwarves, and for warring with the Jotun. I mention this because the hammer reminds me of Dune's mosaic, and it looks like the anvil table thing before him. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I got on that. It's oddly similar, is all I'll say. But also one last thing, Thor is associated with the Roman god Jupiter, whose consort was Juno, the goddess of marriage and childbirth. And that feels sort of like a connection to Selays. Grasping at straws here, but it's, again, I feel like it's worth mentioning. Our last stop in this section is ancient Greece. In Greek mythology, there's a clear comparison to be made between June and Hephaestus, the god of fire, volcanoes, metalworking, artisans, metallurgy, artisans, carpenters, forges, sculpting, blacksmiths. It sounds like June to me. Hephaestus made the weapons and armour of the gods, as well as thrones and other random gifts that require being crafted in some way. He was also said to have built automatons, living creatures of metal that carry out work for him, primarily because he was actually disabled, though there was no fixed source on if this was inflicted upon him, or just the way he was born, or through some unknown disease or some such. According to this book I've been reading, the most common accepted theory is that the original story about how he became handicapped was that he was thrown from Mount Olympus by Zeus for defending his mother Hera. For reference, Zeus was angry with Hera because she was actively attempting to murder Heracles, Zeus's famous bastard son, at that time, and he caught her in the act. So Hephaestus came in and tried to defend his mother, and Zeus disapproved of that, let's say, in typical god fashion. In some stories it said that Hephaestus actually built himself a wheelchair, but, it's worth doing a bit more research into that if you want, but that's just what I've read. There's also a strong connection to Prometheus, I think. The story of Prometheus is that he was a Titan. Titans being the predecessors of the Olympians. It's a whole story, but Prometheus was the one who created humanity from clay, and gifted them fire from the gods in secret. And when the gods found out that Prometheus did this, he was bound to a mountainside, and his insides would be feasted upon by eagles for the rest of eternity. He was later freed by Heracles, and he was often sought for good advice. Now, the thing about this is the fire he gifted humanity wasn't literal fire. He gifted humanity technology, civilization, knowledge. Kind of like how June did to the Dalish. And he's widely regarded as this protector of humanity, having suffered to give the people the ability to take charge of their own lives without the need for gods. Again, kind of like June. Fun fact, our cat is actually called Prometheus because we have a great love for this myth. And yeah, that's all I have for comparisons. I'm absolutely no expert or professional. I just really love mythology, and I've tried my best to gain a better understanding of it over time. So if you're interested in any of this, I recommend going out there and looking things up for yourself, because you're bound to find more reliable information than me. Or a wider variety, because I'm focusing so heavily on relations and whatnot. And I really hope this has given you a bit of insight and a bit of, I didn't know that. Because, yeah, that's always fun. On to the next part. 9. Thoughts and theories. So, there's a lot of theories out there, an understatement. One of them being how June is like Ghilan'nain, or he's actually a dwarf, or a half-dwarf, or that he's somehow more important than the lore implies. All that stuff. What I want to talk about here today is specifically this. Oddly similar, right? Almost a bit too similar. Surely that's just a coincidence, right? Well, seems like a decent coincidence. Interesting. Oh wait, not quite done yet. So, that's a lot of images I just threw at you. I think there's enough evidence to point to June's lore relating to the dwarves somehow, definitively. How exactly his lore relates to dwarves, I can't say without being speculative. But it's definitely there, like motifs hinting at this greater narrative. So some of the questions that might arise from this are, did he slay a titan? Did he use their blood, which is lyrium, somehow? Did he establish underground colonies for the elves? Was he himself a dwarf, or an elf-blooded dwarf? Was his Vallaslin meant to imply the weaving or unification of two cultures? Did he negotiate with the dwarves on behalf of the elves? Did he learn some unique lore or techniques from the dwarves, like Luthaius the dwarf son? Could he have been the one to create the foci? Did he create the Vallaslin using lyrium brands, kickstarting or even advancing slavery in Elven? I have no idea. But remember Vir Defara raising the Synalium? I think the favour he performed within that codex is related to the dwarves, related to his base lore. It's important, but we can't say exactly how. There are 3 other gods that are connected to the dwarves in some way. Mythal and Fen'Harel, because of the lyrium processing mine you visit in Trespasser, with all the statues of the 2 of them there, as well as some codex entries that just very much imply that they were doing something with the dwarves or to the dwarves. As well as lore about Elgornan throwing the sun under the earth. And in lore it's speculated that that is the reason the dwarves fear the surface and sunlight, because of Elgornan and what he did with the sun. Somehow. Is this a piece of the puzzle, or is it a red herring? I have absolutely no idea, but I think there's so much we can take from that. It's worth looking at and contemplating because of it. So that is all I have on the theories and thoughts section. I don't have any answers, I just have so many more questions, like everyone else. On to the next chapter. 10. Bastion of the Fade. You probably saw the chapter title for this and wondered what the hell it means. Did you miss something? Is she talking complete nonsense now? Well, the Bastion of the Fade is what I call the semicircle lineup we've seen in the Dreadwolf teasers. This thing. to me it looks like a fortress, and the semicircles look like bastions. Obviously you have the elven god symbols within these semicircles, and like I believe there's also a place in the Emerald Graves where there's a place called Ghilan'nain's Bastion. I don't know, my brain's made that connection between, oh, these are bastions. These are bastions of the Fade, or bastions of the Golden/Black City. It's just what my brain's attached it to, and it sounds cool. So I'm gonna go with that. So basically this part is my guess as to which god correlates to which bastion. I've got pretty solid guesses for all of them, so every video at the end I'm gonna have this section where I'll look at symbols and say, oh well, this is definitely this. I say definitely, my personal definitely guess. Most of them do actually have symbols that correlate to the symbols on the thing, so by the end of the series it will make sense, I promise. Now, in the last chapter I showed what I believe to be June's symbol. This is one of the ones where I'm making a big guess, so I'm not 100% sure, but it's there and I might as well, because I can't imagine who else it would be, with the way the rest of the lineup is. Like I said, you'll see later on in the series. So I place June here. I'm sure a few of you just go, huh, okay. Or you're maybe like, no, that's wrong, he has to go here, or no, that's this other god. I would love to hear what you think. I really, 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 really want to know what you think each god correlates to, because it's just a fun little guess game, honestly. I'm not 100% certain on some of them, so I would really love to hear what your lineups look like in your own mind. Or maybe what other people have said online, because I know a lot of other people's is going to look different from mine. And that's all I have on this section, so yeah. And that's all I have for today, guys. This video took so much research and so many rewrites, it's embarrassing. Plus, I've had such a crazy, stressful month with real world things. I don't want to bring anyone down, but this channel really has helped distract me from some not great stuff. And I just want to say I really appreciate all of you guys with the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. It's still crazy to me that so many people actually like my content. Because the only reason I'm making this is because I just like doing it. And I love Dragon Age, I love talking about the lore. Thank you, all of you. It's insane. Anyway, that is all I've got for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if I've said something incorrect, if you have theories of your own, what your opinions of June are. Maybe, okay, well, this part of the video didn't make sense. Anything at all, please let me know in the comments. Have a great day, guys.